Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Marketing Mondays, a five-part digital marketing webinar series. I'm Jolene Carey Pace, the program coordinator at the Wilkes University Small Business Development Center, and I'm so happy that all of you could join us this afternoon. This five-part series is hosted in partnership with IdeaWorks Marketing and Cole Creative. And today for our first session, Creating a Marketing Plan, we have Alyssa Ellsworth, the Senior Director of Creative and Content from IdeaWorks Marketing, presenting for us. Just a quick note before we begin to please put yourselves on mute so that we can avoid having any background noise. Also, as you go along, you can type any questions that you might have into the chat box, as there will be time at the end of the presentation to ask any questions. And now I'll go ahead and hand it over to Alyssa. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Jolene. All right. So today, what we'll be covering, as Jolene said, is the marketing plan. And what we've developed here is our GPS process. So we'll talk about that, and we'll certainly talk about it in the context of digital, because obviously this is, this series is focused on digital marketing. So we'll take you through our GPS plan and talk a little bit more specifically about how this really applies for digital. All right. So just in getting framed up today and thinking about, marketing in the next normal, we certainly understand, that everything over the past year, we've heard it time and time again, that everything has completely changed, right? That we understand that, you very well may have struggled last year. We've seen other groups, certainly do, amazingly well. So we understand everybody's at a very different point with their businesses and really with their marketing efforts. It's impacted everybody differently. But when you start to really think about your marketing planning and how you're moving forward and how you're going to reach those who you want to reach and you need to reach, and when we start thinking about marketing planning, we really always come back to this simple equation, right? And this is something that we developed pre-pandemic because it's true when you're doing your marketing planning, but now it's really, even more applicable today. So what it boils down to for us and what we really advise when you're doing your marketing planning is to keep it simple, first of all, to kind of step away from the grandiose big plans and do something that's a little bit smaller, but more actionable. And we'll talk through that today about how you can really, use what we're suggesting here to keep it very simple, but also create something that's nimble, right? To be flexible. And we all understand during this time that being flexible is something that we've all needed to do, in one way or another. But when you're thinking about your marketing planning, how can you create something that you can revisit time and time again, something that flexes as things continue to change for you? So what we always suggest with marketing planning, but that's certainly even more true today, is to keep it simple, to remain nimble, and that's really where you're going to find your success. So traditional marketing plans can be very daunting, and marketing as a whole can feel very daunting. And we'll talk about this a little bit, but as you start thinking about, creating a plan, a lot of people have it in their head that it needs to be this large document, that it needs to be something that, has a great amount of goals and, gets very, very detailed. And what we found in doing this, this GPS process is that people find their most success when it's not this large, cumbersome document, right? And when you think about a marketing plan, it can feel daunting because you may be used to thinking about it in this way. But what ends up being most successful is really those small, those simple plans with really actionable goals. And so that's what we're really talking about today, is to kind of get your head away from the traditional marketing plan that can seem so nebulous and daunting and really get to something that's more actionable. Because for GPS, we talk about growth, profit, and success. And we talk about, really focusing on those things with a plan that you really use and something that you don't end up losing or that doesn't, suit you. So that's what we're talking about today is shifting from that traditional approach to something that's really more actionable. So, as I said, this is our GPS marketing approach, and it's designed to be different. And we'll talk about this more in a minute. But in this new normal, we really want this to be a plan that you use, that you can come back to, that you can adjust as things continue to change for your organization. So, um, this is going to be really key in how you will start to think about your digital strategy and really all of your marketing planning going forward. You want something that's going to be a less is more approach, and this to be the one thing that you'll use. So we call this GPS marketing, and I'll talk a little bit more about what that means on the next slide. So, whenever we're doing any kind of initiative like this, we always like to make a familiar analogy because we want it to be something that you can easily relate to, that, you say, that makes sense to me, and I can relate it back to something that I know in my day to day life. So, in this particular instance, for our GPS marketing plan, we're using the GPS, like a global positioning system. It's something that we're familiar with. It's something that we access on our phones. It's a typical tool. And really, we like to frame our things around this because it gets us thinking about the marketing planning process in a way that isn't so daunting, but it's something that we can really relate to. So we have some tools and we have some key areas that we'll focus on today. And so the 5 key areas that you'll see here really how the whole strategy for you, or the whole approach to your marketing planning and your digital planning, is really going to come about. So the first area that you'll see here, and we'll talk through all of these today, is going to be your true north. So when you think about your true north, you think about where your starting point is, right? So your true north is really going to be that honest assessment of where you are at present. And we know that this can be challenging because sometimes it's very difficult for you to even find your true north, because when we're talking about the challenges of small businesses, it can tend to be a little bit nerve-wracking to create an honest assessment of where you're at, right? We tend to think of our small businesses as our babies to a degree, and it can be hard for us to critique them. But really, with our true north, which we'll talk about at length today, it's determining where you're at this present moment, and determining, now that I know where I'm at, what do I need to be successful? So that's our first. Our second is our route. So you want to start thinking about, okay, I know where I'm at. Now I need to start thinking about, what am I going to do to get where I want to go? So you know that you need to implement these actions to be successful, but what are those? What are those, and how can I really achieve what I'm looking to achieve? So that's about your route. Your third is your navigation. So when you're thinking about that kind of turn by turn direction, that's what we're talking about here when we talk about your navigation, is what are those directions that you need to follow to really get the achievement that you want, the results that you want, and to meet the goals that you've established. So that's really your navigation. Your fourth is going to be your system display. So when we talk about the system display, this is really your tool set. It's the resources that you use. It's the tools that you need to put forth to make these goals become something actionable for you. So we'll talk a little bit more about what that means for your system display. And then, of course, last but not least, is your expense reports, or your budget. So when you think about just taking a trip, you know that you can't go on any kind of road trip without having an idea, at least, of what you're able to spend or what you are planning to spend. So we talk about budget because we always know, it's funny, but one of the things that we say most often is that you don't always necessarily know exactly what you can spend, but you know exactly what you can't spend, right? You really have a good gauge probably now of, how much effort and time and, money you can put into these things. So you really do need to, think about that and think about your expense report or your budget, because what'll happen if you don't is that you have these plans in place but you can't fully execute them. So we'll talk a little bit more about the budget and creating a budget that's realistic for you. And then there's 4 focus points in our GPS marketing plan that you'll see today and that we'll talk about. So the first is your destination. So that's always going to be the purpose and the intent. So we talk about the destination being, the purpose behind taking your trip, if you will. So what's the meaning behind what we're doing here? What's your real intent? And that's your destination. For your course, this is going to be what are the actions and tasks that you need to accomplish in that area. So when you talk about your course, that's what we're taking you along here, is those actions that you need to implement to be successful. Your return here is what's the expected outcome going to be. So when you talk about your return on investment, or you talk about what results you're going to see from what you're doing, we always need to keep the return top of mind, because we want obviously that return on your investment. And then finally is your roadside assistance. So sometimes as you're working through this plan and you're kind of creating your goals and aligning them to some tactics and what have you, there are just tools and resources that you need to call upon those things as you would your kind of roadside assistance. So we'll see these focus points as we walk through the 5 key areas of GPS marketing. You will also see, as we're walking through, a couple special call outs. And this is really just for you to think about, almost like your road signs that you see along the way. So there are certain times where we'll kind of call out and say, okay, as you're working through this process, we need you to stop here and think about something, or we need you to approach something with caution. Or there might be a different kind of warning sign where you're seeing something go 2 different ways and you kind of have to make a choice in that process. So when you see these, again, it's really designed to be something simple and actionable for you, that you can say, okay, I recognize that I need to stop, or I need to make this choice. And this is really just, again, to enhance the GPS marketing, but to get you thinking about something that's very familiar to you, so that the process is easier and not as daunting. Right. So as we start walking through the process, as I said, your true north is where we always begin. And your true north is about your starting point. It's about figuring out where you're at today and where your business is at presently. So as part of your true north, what's your destination, or what's really going to be that purpose and intent of your true north, or finding that? And what that purpose is creating, as I said, this honest assessment of where you're at today. And it can be challenging to do this, as I said, because it can be challenging to, look at your business in this kind of different lens and say, okay, I'm recognizing what's working or what's not working. But what you need to come out of this with is a clear direction of where you are. So when we talk about the return, we talk about knowing, okay, now that I've honestly assessed where I'm at, where my competitors live, what that landscape looks like. Now, at least I have some direction on where I am and now where I need to go. So that's all in your true north. So as you start working through your planning process, you want to take this course. These are really the key questions, these actions and tasks, and key questions that you need to ask yourself. So if we're thinking about some of these questions, who are my target customers? Who's my competition? How do I measure up against who my competitors are? If we think about this, because this is obviously focused on digital. So if you keep digital in mind here for a minute, it can be easier than you think to start pulling out really good information about, your course and your true north here. So if you keep digital in mind for a minute, one of the things that you can do as you're working through some of these questions is doing a simple web or social media assessment to really look at what your competition is doing. And sometimes we think we know what our competitors are doing until we really dig in. Because sometimes, we're running our small businesses here and we can get away from looking at what our competitors are doing. So one of the things that you can do is really do a social media checkup or a website checkup to see, the strategies that they're implementing. Are your competitors using blogs? How often are they posting on social media? What reactions are they getting? And then you can start looking and kind of seeing, where do their customers seem to be hailing from? And you can do a lot of this just by doing, some website checking and some social media checking to see where they live. One of the other things that you can do is, if you haven't, sign up for an array of newsletters. If your competitors have newsletters or anything to subscribe to, you definitely want to keep up to date with those things, because that's when you're really getting a sense of, okay, how are they talking to their customers? What are they saying? And then that it just helps you along your course, right? Your course is not all about your competition, but it does start to help you frame, okay, what are they saying that perhaps I'm not? Or how am I different than what they're doing, right? So when you start digging into doing a kind of digital assessment of what they're doing today, it can help you figure out where you're trying to go as part of your true north. So these are just some questions to ask yourself as you're working through the first part in the process. Your roadside assistance for here is going to be, two simple pieces that really work every time. So the first is going to be, and we'll talk a little bit more about this, is going to be your SWOT analysis, or your strengths, your weaknesses, your opportunities, and your threats. And this is something that we suggest going back to time and time again. So we'll talk a little bit about that, what that means in just a minute. But then a competitive analysis as well. And those two are really acting like those tools and resources that you need to really be successful in establishing what your true north is. So I'll talk a little bit more now about that SWOT analysis. That SWOT analysis is, and you're likely familiar with this, is really establishing, okay, what's happening on the inside of my business, but now what's happening outside. So for the internal piece, that's kind of your top level. What's happening inside my business is thinking about your strengths and your weaknesses. So that internal place where you're really saying, honestly with myself, what do I know that my business is doing well with? And then you really can use this to start jotting things down, right? Where do I know that I'm performing well? And how do I know? So when you're talking about digital, and we'll talk about some of those tools, and we do have another webinar coming up next Monday where we'll really dig into some more of those tools. But when you talk about digital, there's a great opportunity here with metrics and different analytics to show how you're performing. So you can back that up and you can say, I know I'm doing well at X because the data supports it. So you'll have some basis to do that when we talk about digital. But really, here is anything that you know that you're doing particularly well. That is in your top left quadrant. Then you work into your weaknesses. And as we said, this can be challenging to identify, but again, you can use today's digital tools that we'll talk about a little bit more to your advantage, because there are numbers to back up different things. So you can say to yourself, as we're talking about, website traffic or your social media presence, or when we talk about sending email blasts, all of those things come with, some data with them. So then you can say, okay, this wasn't performing so well. This is an area where perhaps we're weak. And again, having that, having that digital presence just helps you give a little bit more context to, okay, I understand why this is or isn't working, because at least I have some grounds of some numbers to back those things up. And that's not always your be all and end all, but at least it starts to give you a foundation of what's working and what's not working. And testing along the way is also super important for this, because then you can start to see, okay, and we'll talk a little bit more about what that means, but you can start to test with your digital strategies and see if it's, leaning more so to something that you're getting stronger with, or if it's still consistently weak for your business. And then when we get into your opportunities and we get into your threats, that's really where we talk about what's kind of happening outside, right? So your strength and weakness is, what's happening here. And your external is, what are these other factors at play? So you want to start jotting down your opportunities now. So your opportunities are excellent for asking not only yourself, but asking your team members, asking business partners, and asking some of your trusted customers as well. So, this is really a place where you say to yourself, what can we be doing that we aren't doing today? And a lot of this could come out of what you're seeing your competitors do as well, right? So once you're kind of doing that competitive analysis, you can kind of see maybe where they're playing that you're not, and they might be opportunities for you, because they might present themselves with, okay, I can see that they're doing this, but I can do X. So it's about crafting those opportunities around what you see, happening out there, and then what the opportunities are that your customers are identifying. They're the ones that really have a finger on the pulse of your business too. So you want to look and see what you could be, what opportunities could exist, or that they might like to see from you, and listen to them as part of this process too. And then once you kind of determine what all those opportunities are, then you have to vet them through, right? You have to, from a business sense, say to yourself, okay, there are a lot of opportunities perhaps here, but what's actually feasible? So your business at the end of the day, you'll be able to ascertain, from a time standpoint, from a budget standpoint, what is going to be an opportunity for you. And then your threats are your last bit. So your threats, you want to ask yourself as part of this, what exists that could be shaking my foundation a little bit? So obviously a pandemic is one of those things for sure. But what other threats exist out there? So, you need to look at the competitive landscape. Ask yourself, is there a new competitor that's in, the landscape that wasn't there a year or two ago, and so on and so forth. Ask yourself what those threats are, and for digital too. Look at yourself and kind of look at your business and see, what other people are doing. And perhaps it could shed some light on, maybe for you, website growth for your industry is really low right now. So you got to think about, do your research, but really think about what kind of threats are at play here, because when you establish what those are, it helps you really build a plan that is successful and that, doesn't take you down a bad path. So the exercise for this part of your True North is doing your SWOT analysis, doing your competitive analysis for your business. And I did want to mention at this point too, that we do have a supplemental workbook that goes along with the GPS marketing plan. So after this, we'll share this resource with you, but it'll have these resources in here. So it has your SWOT analysis page for you. It has, the graphic that you're seeing here, an area for notes, and some other things in there as well. So again, it's not necessarily something that, is kind of hanging out there. It's something that we really have a process to help you walk through. So your SWOT analysis will be available to you. And then, so from there, from your True North, you know that your return has to be an honest assessment of where you are at today, understanding, now that I'm here, where do I need to go? So that's really your route. And this is determining, again, where we need to go. And we'll walk through kind of the same steps that we did for the True North. But in your route, I'll just call upon this for just a minute. There is, it's very important to set goals. So when we start thinking about, now I know where I have been, where I kind of need to go, and where you want to go, goals will be more important than ever. So the importance of setting goals, we'll talk a little bit about this, but really what it boils down to is that goals do really put you on a better path. This is just a well-known study that was done where students that were in school, they were MBA graduates, they were interviewed while they were students and then 10 years later. And then students who hadn't really written down their goals, were not showing their the same success as those who did. So when we talk about this, it really boils down to the 3% of those who had written goals had earned on average 10 times as much as the other 97% of the class. So when you think about this, really what we take away from this is just another example of, when you're intentional about writing down your goals and you're intentional about using this workbook, you'll often find a similar, path to success. That really being intentional about writing them down is going to generate some return for you. Your route, as we said, is all about, okay, now I'm getting on the path of where I'm going. I'm setting my goals. What are my goals? So your destination is going to be establishing what we call SMART goals. So we'll talk about what that SMART is an acronym for, but whenever you're setting a goal, it's going to be your measure to make sure that it's SMART. And we'll talk about what that means. And then your return. So what are you going to get out of this? You are going to get out of this 1 or 2 really concise goals that help you with all the rest of your marketing planning, right? And so we talk about 1 or 2 and it can sound like, oh, that's not enough for my marketing plan. But as we said, we really want this to be the plan that you use and the plan that you come back to and that you flex with as things change. So this isn't, that you create this plan and then it's, in a vacuum. We really want you to return to it from time and time again. So once you get those 1 or 2 goals together and you work towards those through your marketing planning, then you can come back to those goals, and revise them or create new goals and work through the process again. So that's really what we're talking about here, is really goal setting and determining where we're going now. So as I said, this is an exercise for you to do whenever you're establishing your goals. And these are what we call SMART goals. So SMART stands for specific, measurable, attainable or achievable, relevant, and timely. So when you start doing your own goals for your, digital planning or for your marketing planning, you run through them and kind of run them through the SMART test to make sure that they are appropriate goals for you. So you'll ask yourself, is this specific, first of all? So a good way to determine if your goal is specific enough is, can you measure it, right? Step 2, can you measure it? So for example, if we're talking about your digital strategy, let's say that you have, an e-commerce website and you want to increase revenue on this by 10% in 10 weeks, let's just say. So we know that that's specific because you've, assigned your percentage, you've assigned a time frame, and we know that it's measurable because it's something that you will have a baseline for and that you can see in 10 weeks if you've actually accomplished. Right. So this is what you have to do as you're working through your goals. Sort of take them through this process and say, is it measurable? How will I know? Because I can look at this number compared to this, or use something that's a good basis for you. Is it relevant to today? Is it something that takes into account the pandemic? It takes into account where customers are placing their attention today. Is it timely, right? Is now the right time? So if your goals meet all of these qualifications, then we know that this is the best path for success, is making sure that they do. So when we take you on your course for this one, you'll ask yourself things like, what do I want to accomplish? Or why is this goal important to us? Or when can I complete this goal? And, all of these are very important. They all deserve your attention. But the third one is probably one that we want to call some specific attention to. So do I have the time and resources to achieve this goal? Do I have the right people in place and the amount of energy that's needed to devote to this initiative? So let's say, for example, your goal is that you want to increase traffic to your website by, 10% in 10 weeks. But then you kind of say, okay, in my honest assessment of myself and my business, I know that we're really strapped. We have, let's say, a team of just a couple people, and I know that this isn't necessarily realistic because this is going to involve some detailed steps here, right? We don't expect this web traffic to take care of itself, and there are some strategies that we need to implement, and we don't necessarily have the right team in place to do this. So you kind of have to align everything that you're thinking about with your goals to really that third point. Do I have the time and resources to achieve this? And if you do, then that's going to make sure that you're going to be as successful as possible, right? And as I said, all of these are important, but it is something when you start thinking about the boiling it down to the tactics, which we'll get to, and you start thinking about, okay, who is going to do the things that need to be done to make this happen? If you don't have that right amount of team, or you don't have the budget or the resources that you need, then you need to take a step back and revisit your goal. And perhaps that's a goal that you set for another time. So again, ask yourself these questions after you've really developed your SMART goals. And your roadside assistance for here, those are going to be your tools and resources and things along the way that you need. And they're going to be your SMART goals and your SMART goal template. And again, as we said, your cautionary piece right here is make sure that they are SMART, S-M-A-R-T, for all of that they stand for. And if they're not, don't be afraid to go back and revise them until they do meet that criteria. So your SMART goal template is here. And again, we'll share a full workbook for this so that you have, a physical, tangible thing that you can use as you're working through your process. But you want to think about your SMART goals like this. Our goal is to, and then you insert whatever it is that you want to achieve by, how you're going to measure your success within, so that you give yourself a time frame. Because what happens, and we all know this, when you don't give yourself a time frame or a deadline or something, things can get a little bit loose. So you want to make sure that you're on track with whatever time frame you've set. And then that last piece is really critical. It's by. So you want to think about the actions that you're going to take to achieve your goal. So for the sake of the example, let's say that your goal is to increase web traffic. So work through that process. Our goal is to increase web traffic. We're going to do this by, measuring the visits to our site within X amount of time. And we're going to do this because we can implement some actions around it. And those actions are going to be, perhaps running some social media ads that drive people to our site. Perhaps it's sending some e-blasts that direct people to your site. Perhaps if you have a brick and mortar location, perhaps at that point, when you have a captive audience at your brick and mortar, you're giving them an incentive to visit the website, whatever that is. And so you really want to think about what those actions are that will help you achieve that goal. So use that template as your basis of setting those 1 to 2 really good goals for what you want to accomplish. And then this is our SMART goals, reminder. on the left of what it is and your template on the right, and that'll be available to you in the workbook that we will share. Okay, so now we get into our navigation. So now we've walked through our true north and we've talked about where we have our honest assessment. Now we've talked through our route and our goals of, what are we going to do and where do we want to go? And now it's really in the navigation about how do I get there? So that's what we're talking about here. And your destination is going to walk you through, or what the purpose of this section is to walk you through creating actionable strategies and tactics. And there's a real difference between your strategy and your tactics. People tend to think that they are the same, and people tend to think that, they're interchangeable, but they're not. Your strategies are a little bit broader, and we'll talk about this, but your tactics are those very specifics of, let's say, we talked about, in the SMART goals template, by doing X, by, sending X amount of e-blasts, by doing X. So that's when we get into that really nitty gritty of the by doing X, that's when we're talking about your tactics. So your return from this whole navigation exercise is going to be, what actions am I going to take? I know what my goals are, but now how am I going to get there? And your course, okay? So your course is the questions that you're asking yourself at this point. What are the best ways to reach who I'm trying to reach? Okay, think about questions like, where does my target audience learn about the services that I provide? And this is interesting, especially when we talk about digital, because it's about listening to your customers. Where are they coming from, or your prospective target audience, where are they coming from? How are they learning about me? And it's interesting because sometimes what you'll hear is things like word of mouth, right? You'll hear that it's not always that they found you by, searching the web. So it can be a really interesting exercise for you to dial into what your customers are saying and really understand, where does my target audience learn about me? And it can be simple. Sometimes it's things like a form for how did you hear about us, right? That you use. But then you start to get a better sense of, okay, how are people really engaging with me and learning about my business? And some other questions to ask yourself: what can we do to get our message out there in support of our goals, right? Now that you know kind of those few goals that you've set for yourself, what are those things that we can do to make sure that you're successful at communicating that out? And then there's other questions too. Ask yourself who on your team is best suited to support these efforts, right? Are there individuals who are perhaps more savvy with social media? Do you need to lean on, the support of, some marketing partners to do these things for you? Or, who on my team can take this plan and really run with it? So they're really the things that you need to ask yourself here as you're working through the process. And, ask yourself, where am I communicating today? What can we afford to do? Who is going to be the one that is going to be able to, or who are going to be the people who can really carry this forward? So in your navigation, your roadside assistance, or your tools and resources here, are going to be the differences between your strategy and your tactics. So when we talk about them, we like to use the quote that a strategy is about doing the right things, but a tactic is about doing the things right. So again, your tactic, if you kind of think about that, is, getting down to the real nitty gritty of, okay, I have this goal, I have a strategy in place, but then what are the, very actionable things that I need to employ to make sure that I'm carrying this through? So we'll give you an example of what that is. So let's say, for instance, as you're working through this part in the process, you've got your goals, that you need to perhaps expand your digital presence on social media. So your strategy then would be a little bit more high level because your strategy is always going to be that higher place. So perhaps your strategy is, you know, that you are going to expand your digital presence on social media because you know that you want to show your customers that you have, you know, a certain skill set and expertise, but you can't necessarily show them in person due to COVID. Okay, so this might be this is a very specific strategy, right? It might not apply to you, but you know that you need to expand that digital presence, and you know that you're going to use social media to get there, to really get in front of your customer base and show them what your skills and expertise are. So that's your strategy. That's at your high level, what you're going to do. But then your tactics really become, as we said, those very, actionable. How do you do it? So your tactic for something like this might be that you're going to create 3 to 5 Facebook posts, let's say a month, just when we're talking about this one strategy. That doesn't mean 3 posts per month total. It just means in alignment with this strategy. You're going to create those posts per month to highlight your thought leadership in the category. So let's say, you're a travel agency. So perhaps as part of, what you've been doing, you have a blog out there, or, you have a resource about safe travel, and you want to, again, communicate your skills and your expertise to your customers. And so that tactic is going to be, okay, 3 to 5 posts a month, an average of, 1 a week or so, a little bit more, a little bit less, to really get in front of my customers and show them that we're the experts in this category. So again, a very specific strategy, but then even getting into that nitty gritty of how am I actually going to do this? So that's just one tactic that you might use if you're looking to establish, more of a digital presence and get in front of your customers in that fashion. And, one of the things that we always talk about is that it might not necessarily be from the exercises that you've done leading up to this point that your customers do necessarily live on social media, right? We need to understand where they're coming from, how they've heard about you, how they can interact with you, to even determine if, that push towards more social is really going to be beneficial, right? We certainly, we want to talk about the marketing mix, and we'll talk about that a little bit more in just a minute. But thinking about this and kind of working through your strategies will bring to light, where your customers live, what is of interest and value to them, and kind of meeting them where they are. So we don't necessarily want to say Facebook is the place to be before we have the grounds to be able to say that from the other exercises that you've done. So for your navigation piece, we're asking for you to do 2 to 3 strategies and tactics, right? Keep it simple, keep it nimble, right? That's our real equation that we're using for this. So don't get too in the weeds, just keep it simple with these 2 to 3 tactics and strategies. And that's really what is going to help you find success with the plan. Now we get into our system display. So when we talk about our system display as part of this process, we talk about your messaging, all right, and we're going to talk about your mediums, right? And so this is going to be very important as we start talking tactics to really say, okay, how am I going to communicate, and through which mediums am I going to do it, right? And your return is going to be, I understand my target audience. I understand that there are a variety of ways I can reach them, but now I've really determined, okay, which messaging or which mediums I'm going to use to really get in front of them and communicate to them in the way that is going to be effective for my business. So your course, when we talk about your messaging, are your questions that you'll ask yourself. So for instance, what are the benefits that we offer, right? Sometimes it's been because of the pandemic that your benefits may have changed to people a little bit. It may be that just the entire landscape of your business has changed, and now you need to revisit these things. So again, it's a really great time to do this exercise if you've been working through, a difficult time with your business, because a lot of this may have changed from when your business started, or it may have evolved in some way due to the pandemic. So it's a great time to ask yourself, am I communicating what's in it for them? Right. And ask yourself this whenever you're doing anything. Say, does my target audience understand the benefit to them? Because if they don't, then they're not going to find value in what your product or offer is to them, or your service. And then, does your messaging demonstrate that you understand their wants and needs and problems? So again, it's interesting because their wants and needs and problems could have really changed as of late. So it's about, asking yourself these questions about, what do they want and how am I solving that problem for them, right? And then ask yourself, am I giving them a call to action, right? Am I giving them something that makes them respond in a certain way, right? So when you're crafting your messaging, you want to think about, do I tell them to do X? So if I'm starting to send more e-blasts because I want to drive people to my website, because I understand that on my website, that's where I'm getting, the most traction with my business right now. Am I making sure that in my e-blasts, I'm driving them to the places on my website that are of interest to me? So again, digital is really great for this, because when we talk about, I'll use a website for the sake of the example. We talk about a website, you'll be able to get a sense of how much time people are spending on a particular page. You'll have a lot of detail into where people are going, how they navigate through your site. And so as you start thinking about these things, then you can really craft your messaging around, okay, am I giving them a nice call to action that's going to make them respond in the way that I would like them to respond? And then when we talk about your mediums, right? So then we talk about, okay, I have my messaging, but how am I going to get it out there? Which kind of mediums am I going to use? So ask yourself these questions. Do I know the mediums that my target audience uses, right? And if you don't, then you need to do a little bit more digging, right, to determine what those might be. Have I considered traditional and non-traditional mediums? So of course, we're talking a little bit more digital today as part of this series, but we always, advise that you think about how your digital strategies fit into your marketing mix, right? And we certainly believe that, you've got to find that good mix between your traditional and your non-traditional, and kind of getting a little bit more into, not just digital, but a mix of the two. And have I considered how that might work for me? And then, of course, you want to think about, am I looking at these things based on my return on investment, right? So it might be that something, sounds really appealing and looks great, but it's not after time generating a real return on investment for you. So you want to think about that as well. Perhaps you're a local gym and you have a publication that you put out every so often to prospects, right? And it might look great, but if it's not bringing people, in and getting them acquainted to, your gym and getting them in, or maybe it's that, they're not taking the action from what you're putting forth that you want them to take, right? Maybe it's that you're still offering virtual classes for people, right? And if they're not really consuming that medium in the way that you want them to, and really responding to your message, then, perhaps it's not the best return on your investment. So then you might take a look at, okay, maybe this newsletter approach can be something else. So you want to take a look at that as well, and ask yourself these questions about your medium. just a little bit more on your messaging. Just some tips as you're crafting your messaging. Any more, those messages that are really resonating with people are short, simple. What's in it for me, right? Pictures, video are very big right now. So don't be afraid to, take your message, right? It might be a long message to start with, and then kind of hack it down to size and say, okay, how can I say something short and impactful, right? But always bring it back to the benefit, right? Bring it back to what the benefit is for them, how you're different from your competition, and all of the things that really put you in a different category, right? And make them want to consider your business versus the competitors. And as part of this process, we want to make sure that you're always true to your brand, right? So as you think about your brand and you think about your personality as a business, and make sure that your messaging is in alignment with that, because people really gravitate towards a personality, right? So if everything kind of comes together cohesively, and the way that your people speak is the same way that is written on your various mediums and through your messaging, when everything starts to feel cohesive, that's when you really have a good sense of your brand, right? And people know what to expect from you, and people know the feel and the essence of who you are. So don't lose that as you're working through your messaging. Ask yourself, what's my brand's real personality, and how is that shining through in what I'm creating for people. So as you're working through your messaging and your mediums, your system display, again, it comes back to your return on investment. So we like to say, stop for a minute and remind yourself that you can't confuse effort with results. You can work tirelessly on something, but it might not, at the end of the day, generate those results that you're looking for. So you really want to be strategic about how you're creating your messaging and how you're working through this process, because we don't want you to put in all of the time into something that doesn't create a return on investment for you. So that's why we really ask you in all these parts of the process to work through it diligently, so that you know that you're going to get a better return on investment. And that is sometimes, as I had mentioned earlier, sometimes that takes some testing to do, right? It takes some testing sometimes to see what works and what doesn't. So people like to do kind of A/B testing with email lists, for instance. So say we talk about e-blasts for a minute. People like to use this to kind of test out where their messages are becoming more impactful into which group. So sometimes you might, play with this a little bit and kind of see, okay, what's going to generate that return on investment for me? And it's sometimes necessary to just try it, see if it's working, and then you can come back to it and say, okay, after so long I've tried X and it's really not being successful, so maybe I need to look at another avenue. So again, base your decisions on your return on investment, what you will get out of this, what's going to be impactful for you. And at the end of the day, sometimes it is a sad truth that we can put a lot of effort into things that don't become successful. So kind of caution yourself as you're working through this, and really put your time where it's going to generate that real return for you. We have some mediums for consideration here, and this will be shared in your GPS workbook, but we start thinking about the different mediums for how you'll communicate that kind of system display. So you think about SMS text messaging, you think about reaching people with QR codes, which are became popular a number of years ago, but now we're seeing them boom in the restaurant industry, right? Direct mail pieces. So again, you kind of think about your marketing mix, where it makes sense for you, and kind of think about where digital and traditional can kind of come together and play nicely to really meet your target audience where they are. So again, you need to know where your target audience is before you can really determine how you'll communicate with them. But once you do, there are a number of mediums for your consideration. So what we'll ask at this part in the process as you're working through the GPS plan is to do, 5 or 6 messaging statements. Don't create a huge list. Get it down to what those messages are going to be, those core things, and then take it down to your short list of mediums, right? So it's not all about a huge, list that has everything in the kitchen sink. It's really about determining, okay, what are the key messages and what are those mediums that I am going to put forth and really try, to use that will work best for my business. And okay, the last bit, but certainly not least, is your expense report. And when we talk about the expense report, this is, one final section to complete is going to be, developing a budget. So as I said, we see this a lot. It's you always know kind of what you can't spend. So when you start thinking about your marketing and where you need to put your time and energy, your budget is going to be crucial. So your return here is going to be, what's the budget for your marketing plan? Right? What can I realistically spend to put this in place to make sure that it happens for me? And your course is going to be those questions that you ask yourself, right? What is my revenue goal? That certainly may have changed given the landscape of today, right? How many new customers do we need to reach the goal? How many, number of leads do we need to land one customer, right? And then number 4 is really when you multiply number 2 by number 3, that's how you determine how you're going to really reach your revenue goal. So again, walk this course, ask yourself these questions, and know that it's okay that these things change. They obviously change with the landscape of today. And then ask yourself, okay, what are the activities that I can engage in from a marketing standpoint that can give us the leads we need? So your roadside assistance is a budget template, and we will share this with you as well. We have a budget template. It's in an Excel file that you can use, and it walks you through your budget. So we often get the question of how much should I spend on my marketing? And the quick answer to that is really what we tend to say is just about 3 to 8% of your overall sales. 5% is what we kind of consider the norm. But when it all boils down to it, it ends up being, we say 5% is typical, but it's what you can afford, right? So you got to consider your options here, choose wisely, and understand, you can't exert an insane amount of effort in these things with no return on investment. You need to be mindful of what you can afford. So this is the marketing budget calculator. And as we said, it's a spreadsheet that's put together. And so what you do is you fill in what those pieces are that are an allocation of your overall budget. And it kind of works really well. It breaks it all down for you. And it's just a great resource for you to be able to, enter with your total spend, and it'll break down kind of what you can spend based on the figures that you input. So it's a really nice resource for you to be able to make sure that you're being mindful of your budget. And the last bit is just a very quick template, which is going to take you through the things that we talked about today. This is also included in the book. But what you want to think about is your goals, your strategies, your messaging, your budget. It's all of those things. And kind of if you have a 1-pager, you kind of take this and you're able to, jot down those main pieces, and you've got your GPS plan kind of put together based on this template. So with that, we have a number of resources that are available. There are a number of things out there when you're creating a marketing plan that are available to you. We've listed them here for you. And they're great resources for you to be able to reference as you're creating your marketing plan. But as we like to say, if you fail to plan, you're planning to fail, right? We don't want you to do that. We want you to be as successful as possible. So as you're creating your marketing plan, we really recommend that you take the GPS approach and work through the process that way for success.
Thank you so much, Alyssa. If anyone has any questions, please feel free to unmute and jump right in.
Hi, this is Dorothy from the Wilkes SBDC. I just wanted to pop in and say, if you're starting out, or even if you're just perhaps introducing a new product or service and you're unsure about your target market, we have a lot of resource subscriptions at our office that can maybe help you identify your target market a little bit better, so you know exactly what you're dealing with. And we don't just Google things. We have subscriptions to quality resource guides. So if you do need any help with kind of figuring out that market, or if you have questions about the demographics and whatnot in the area, please reach out to our center and we would be happy to help you with that as well. That's all I wanted to jump in and say.
Thank you, Dorothy. And I believe, Alyssa, you'll share that guidebook with me, and I can certainly email that to all the participants today too. So they'll
That
have
is
that on hand.
yes, that and the interactive marketing budget worksheet as well.
Great. So I'll make sure I get that sent out to all participants. I do want to thank Alyssa for being here today and sharing her presentation, of course. Just to note that I'll also be making available the recording of this training on the Wilkes SBDC YouTube channel, and I'll also email that link to all attendees as well. And just a reminder that our next session in this series is Monday, May 3rd at noon, Digital Toolbox for Businesses with IdeaWorks Marketing. And with that, I want to thank everyone for attending this training. And if you have any questions, of course, don't hesitate to contact us at the SBDC. And I hope that all of you have a wonderful rest of your day. And I look forward to seeing you at our next session next Monday. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.